Boom! We're in. Sorry, it was just showing you that it's also a ventriloquy act available for no extra charge. You're welcome. So, welcome. I'm Chris Grimes. Welcome to the Good Listening To Show, Stories of Distinction and Genius. Today is a very special leadership reflections episode because I've got someone who's an extraordinary leader with lots of leadership reflections to reflect. This is Gina Gardiner, and she is a radical change catalyst, leadership advisor, and speaker. 2 times international best-selling author, and very juicily, if that was not enough, she's also a syndicated radio host on Brushwood Media Network, which transmits mostly across the United States, but globally, I gather. And I had the great privilege, that's not a word, but I said it anyway, privilege of guesting on Gina Gardiner and Friends this very morning. So as you said yourself, Gina, this morning, this is great. She's having a Chris Grimes day, but I'm having a Gina Gardiner day, and it's a wonderful garden to be in. So you're very, very welcome. I think the Queen of Leadership is a mantle I'm going to refer to you as being henceforward. So Gina Gardiner, welcome to the Good Listening To show.
Thank you for joining me to the show, and also thank you for crowning me Queen of Leadership. That's a title that I'm going to keep.
Wonderful. We have Jill Tiny from Collaboration Global in common too. And so we're in a network where it's all about collaboration. And this is a reciprocal arrangement where I've been on your wonderful show. And it's going to be such a delight and privilege. You blew so much happy smoke at what I'm trying to achieve through this storytelling structure, particularly the Legacy Life Reflection series strand I'll talk about at the end. But I'm particularly excited to talk to you because of your reflections on leadership through your very wonderful career thus far. You certainly have a very interesting story to tell. So let's get you on the open road. If someone doesn't have a frame of reference for you, what's your favorite way, Gina, of describing your own cut and thrust of what you do?
I think one of my clients said it for me. It was two clients. One who said that I have the capacity to see the potential in people even when they don't see it themselves. And another client said to me, you're half hugger and you're half ass kicker. And I think that probably describes me perfectly.
And are those your websites? Half hug, halfarsekick.com is where Gina Gardiner comes in.
I ought to look on GoDaddy and see if that's available.
I think we should both rush there now, which is fantastic. Well, that was my idea first, obviously. So what you've best sold, so just talk us through your book empire as well, and also your link tree at the very end. Do look at Gina Gardiner's link tree, because you've got such an empire of leadership and different really wonderful things you're achieving in your cut and thrust.
Yeah, I mean, I've got over 30 books that I've written, but probably the two how-to manuals in terms of leadership, which is Kickstart Your Career and How to Manage Your Staff More Effectively. And they were my first 2 books, and they really are the sort of things you can pick up if you've got a problem and you need to have a difficult conversation, or you want to chair a meeting, or you're trying to deal with young members of staff that you need to engage and induct. And then the other one, which is around my lessons for life, really, which is Thriving, Not Surviving, the 5 secret pathways of happiness, success and fulfillment. And they're the principles I've learned to live by, and they're the ones that I would use around my clients. And although many of my clients are business clients, we are the common denominator. We take ourselves into every moment of every day. And so the lessons for life are also lessons for leadership.
Yes, and indeed, you've got some profound lessons of life that I know we're going to get into. We've had an extraordinary, I've thoroughly enjoyed researching you, and it's been a really wonderful path and journey to get you to this point, to welcome you to the clearing of the Good Listening To show.
Thank you. I'm looking
So just to blow a bit of context, as you know, if you've not seen one of these shows before, where have you been? I've done about 275 of these monkeys now, but this is the show in which I invite movers, makers, shakers, mavericks, influencers, and also personal heroes into a clearing or serious happy place of my guests' choosing, as they all come to share with us their stories of distinction and genius. And as I've already said, Gina Gardiner's here, particularly with a cut and thrust of a leadership reflections. So let's get you on the open road. There's going to be a clearing, a tree, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, alchemy, gold, a couple of random squirrels, a cheeky bit of Shakespeare, a golden baton, and a cake. Hurrah. Any questions before we start?
No, I'm all ready to go.
And it's not a memory test. I'll curate you through it. It's a bit like doing a lovely slalom downhill slope, and I'll pull you in through various gates of storytelling. How
Excellent.
marvelous. So, your clearing is your serious happy place. Where would you say Gina Gardiner goes to get clutter free, inspirational, and able to think?
It's my garden. I call my garden the window of my soul. And although it's not very big, it's very colourful, and I use it to de-stress, to fill my batteries. You'll find out from later in my story, mobility has been an issue for me for many years. So whilst I love being out in nature and, under other circumstances, I might say by the sea or by water or up the mountain, for me, the garden's always accessible. And even when I can't physically get outside, I'm sitting in my in my garden room, and I'm overlooking my courtyard. I've got an internal courtyard. It's full of colour. Or I can go into my front garden of to the back. And for me, being able to see the different forms, the different colours, the different textures, and I change those season by season by the planting that I do. Although architecturally, there's stuff there all the time. That enable and getting my it's not about sitting in the garden for me, it's about getting my hands dirty, it's about, being part of that nature, and when I do that, that's when I de-stress, but that's when also I feel the greatest connection to my inner wisdom and consciousness.
And of all the names to have, Gina Gardiner, you've thought that through. The fact you're clearing is literally your garden and you are the gardener. It is a fantastic clearing and totally apposite and appropriate.
Although the spelling is a little different. Yeah, I am absolutely, I know where you're coming from, um, and anybody can find some small space, whether that's a window box or just looking at the clouds, whatever your physical situation, whatever your financial situation, a space outside where you can connect with nature is open to us all.
And may I ask where it went wrong with the spelling? Not in your case, but in terms of your family history and Gardiner versus Gardiner.
I have no idea, actually. There is some talk that was a derivative that people, in many ways, lots of names are like this, where people couldn't spell, and the person who was recording the spelling decided to be a little creative. But it is interesting. I am often called Gardiner, but it's actually Gardiner. For me, it doesn't matter, other than if you want to get hold of me, it's easier to get the right spelling. Um, but being out in the garden, my mum was a great gardener. In fact, the only rows my mum and dad had were around when my dad got a pair of secateurs because he didn't know when to stop. And they would have a row about, Dad, Peter, I had a wonderful cherry tree until you got at it. What have you done? As three stumps stood up. But yeah, my garden.
Perfect clearing. And I'm now going to arrive with a tree in your
Yes.
clearing. I don't know if you've got a tree in your garden. You described it as a courtyard, but I'm not sure if I'm picturing a tree there or not yet.
I've got a courtyard. I've also got a front garden. And yes, I've got a couple of trees in my front garden.
And I'm assuming you're going to let me into your back garden and your courtyard is where I'm hoping to go with my tree. So
Absolutely.
I'm going to shake your tree now to see which storytelling apples fall out. How'd you like these apples? And this is where you've been kind enough to have thought about, you've had 5 minutes to have thought about 4 things that have shaped you, 3 things that inspire you, 2 things that never fail to grab your attention. When I get onto that, I'll talk about squirrels briefly. And then the one is a quirky or unusual fact about you. Gina Gardiner, we couldn't possibly know about you until you tell us. So reassuringly, as I described already, it's not a memory test, but let's go back into shake the canopy of your tree as you see fit.
Mm-hmm. So the first one I would say is my upbringing. I had parents who had an incredible work ethic, and a father who, if you said that you were a bit fed up, bit bored, didn't feel very well, his response to that is go and do something useful, ideally for somebody else. And whilst it's been an interesting principle to live by, in many ways incredibly powerful and positive, but in another way, I took it to an art form, and forgot all about health and looking after oneself. And so professionally, it's been incredibly powerful and positive. At times, in terms of my health, perhaps not so good. But ultimately, I had parents who valued learning probably above pretty well anything else in terms of how you develop yourself. And that I've been a lifelong learner, and I'm very grateful. My parents were in very different ways inspirational. Um, they were quite tough for us. I mean, I was brought up in a very different generation, I think. But I think that's where I started to learn resilience, and certainly that's been a gift that's helped me throughout my lifetime, really.
So no lying around feeling sorry for yourself. This is get up, contribute, carry on, and
Absolutely.
help.
Definitely. And I think, we hear a lot about anxiety and depression these days, and I do not want to make light of it. But I know from my own situation and from other people that if you can take the attention off what's not working for you and go and do a random act of kindness, or you can go and help someone else, whilst it's important you don't take it to an art form, there's nothing quite like engaging with other people and doing it in a way that you feel makes a positive difference to help you feel better about yourself.
And very profound, rather than wallowing in self-pity, not that you ever were, but as an
Yeah.
expression. And an adage I really like, it the difference in life between what you want and what you get is what you do. So it's very much the proactivity and the action towards that will bring
Yeah.
about change or movement.
I talk to people about it's not that we all have challenges in our life, and I've worked with people who've had the most profound challenges of abuse, emotional, physical, sexual abuse, people who have been made redundant, lost somebody that they love, um, who have lost their business, have been made bankrupt. I mean, I've dealt with other people as well, but those sort of life-changing situations. And I talk to people about the fact it's not the challenge that's going to define you. It's what are you going to do with it? How are you going to look for the gift? And whilst at that moment when life is really tricky, it's often hard to see the gift. What's interesting is when people then look back, having done the inner work, how they see that actually that the very thing that they found so profoundly difficult has shaped them in a way that they're then grateful for.
And I hope we're going to get onto something much more specific about your own path. When
Yeah.
I used an analogy earlier on about pulling you down a ski slope slalom race, not a race, but through some gates of storytelling, I know that you've got an extraordinary story, which I don't doubt you're going to get onto,
Yes.
about challenges to your own, I suppose, health, shall we say.
Yes. So that would be my first leaf that's fallen. And ultimately, I think we are all products of our upbringing. That can be positive, negative, neutral, and a mixture of all three. But for me, because of what happened, um, I think that upbringing, that particular principle of get up and get on, for me was a lifesaver. So the second one would, I think, be lots of things in between, but in terms of profound, I was a keen skier. Um, I had been appointed to be a deputy head or principal of a large school very early. I was appointed to be the deputy. I was 28. And I was appointed to be the catalyst for change. In fact, when I went to look for the job, the head teacher turned around and said, "We don't want you, we want a man." Very different times. We're talking about 1982 at this time. I'm not quite sure why, but I decided to apply anyway. I think I thought it was good practice. And on the day of the interview, I was told, "You realize that if there's a man that's your equal, he'll get the job. You've got to be better than anybody that's there. Otherwise, it's not going to work." I got the job. Incidentally, the acting deputy, a woman, was told not to apply because he was going to appoint a man. So I was persona non gratis when I arrived, youngest on the staff bar two, and literally appointed to bring in ideas and to move the school forward. It wasn't a bad school, but it was very, very old fashioned. And you can appreciate I was 28 at that time. I was the youngest, bar two, by a long way. Most of the staff were in their late 50s and 60s.
And you described it as being old school, and of course that defining attitude at the beginning, the first impression, was incredibly old school. And hopefully 1982 was the last time that presented, but we both know that that's not the case.
No, unfortunately not. Now, I was a keen skier at this time, and I used to ski 2 or 3 times a year. I'd rather ski than have a summer holiday. God knows why. I don't like the cold, I don't like heights, and I'm not very sporty, but I loved it. And in those days, it was very much the fashion to have skis as long as possible. So I had a new pair of skis for Christmas, and I allowed the man in the shop to convince me that instead of the 4 or 5 centimeters longer that I had initially thought I would buy, he convinced me I needed an extra 10 centimeters. Went off skiing February half term, having spent the first 6 months of the school year planning strategically how we were going to move forward. And I went skiing with 4 friends, and with my previous skis, we were all very much on a par. But because I kept on wrapping those 10 centimeters around my neck, I was tail end Charlie, and I kept falling. And on the Thursday of a week's holiday, I had a really nasty fall, and I ripped my brand new ski suit from thigh to ankle, and my earring went through my ear, and I really shook myself up. So I said to my friends, I'm not going to ski with you tomorrow. I'm going to get my confidence back. And they said, well, okay, we'll meet you for lunch. And when we met, they said, we found this fabulous 6-kilometer run. Come and join us. And so I did. It was one of those amazingly beautiful days that you get in the mountains. It was February, late February. The sun was shining. The snow was glistening. It was just magnificent. And we went up on the chairlift. And as we went up from the village looked like a miniature village, and you could just hear the shh of people skiing past. And we got off, and I followed them. And we'd been going perhaps about 5 minutes when we turned a corner, and I was behind them, catching up. And when I caught them up, it was pretty evident that we weren't where they thought they were supposed to be. So instead of it being a 6-kilometer red run, it was a black diamond run. Now, those of you that don't ski slopes go from green, that's for learning, blue, red, black. Black diamond is for idiots and foolhardy. There was no way back. And so we had to traverse this huge mogul field. Now, a mogul is where the snow has been eroded by the wind and the rain, and it's a lump. And some of these are like cobbles. These were 6-foot monsters. And the only way to ski was to turn on the top of the mogul and slide down and then go along and then turn and do the same. And there was powder snow either side. So I skied the first third successfully. I was an experienced skier, and I'd done plenty of black runs, but I hadn't done anything like this before. And then I left it too late to turn, and I had a nasty fall. And it took me about 20 minutes to retrieve my ski and then ski down to where the other 4 were sitting, each on a mogul, rather like an elf sitting on a mushroom. Took my skis off. And we were talking, and I think where my mogul had been exposed to the sun for longer, when I suddenly found myself to be falling, and there was nowhere to land because it was so steep and because of these moguls. And the last thing I remember is a scream. That was me. And then everything went black. I have no idea how long it was, but I'd found in that rolling down and down and down, I'd found a flat, somewhere flat enough for me to land. Eventually, my friends skied down to me. They wanted to call the blood wagon. I was just as insistent that they weren't to do that. And the one good thing about it is that with the 2 falls and the skiing, I was pretty much at the bottom of the slope, and we were very close to the hotel. So they helped me back to the hotel. And I was in a bit of a state, but we travelled home the next day. Fortunately, in one way, we were travelling by coach, so I didn't have to do anything apart from get on the coach. And I arrived home, and my mum took one look at me and dragged me off to A&E. And they said I'd got a bad concussion and I trapped a nerve in my neck. It took me 3 weeks to get back to school. And at this time, I was still wearing a surgical collar, and I wasn't right. I was just doing school and coming home and going to bed. 5 weeks later, we were due to take 150 some pupils on the borough ski trip, and I was the deputy leader. And I was told I could go because we had a medic with us. And so during the week, I skied, but I got more and more like Quasimodo as the week went on. And on the Friday, which is our last day, it was a medal day. It was foggy, it was cold. And when we got back to the hotel, I felt absolutely dreadful. And I said to my colleagues, I've got to go and lie on the bed. Went upstairs, and this was a cheap hotel. We were in bunk beds. God only knows how I got on the top bunk. But within about half an hour, I discovered that I was paralyzed down one side. The pupils were playing and talking in the corridor outside, and I didn't want to frighten them, so I waited. And I have to say that wait, and I don't really know how long it was probably the longest few minutes in my life until someone came to check on me. At that point, all hell broke loose, and I was carted off to the local hospital and then to Geneva University Hospital. And I was there for just over a week, and I was eventually flown home. And by that time, I could walk, but I still had some problems. And it took me about 3 months to get back to school. And I got back to school by the end of May, beginning of June. I wasn't right, but I could come in, teach, go home, go to bed. And I was really pleased to get to the summer holidays in the UK. We, as you know, if you are from the UK, we break up usually about the 20th of July, and we have 6 weeks summer holidays. And I thought to myself, great, I've got 6 weeks. I can really rest and recuperate. 8 days into the holiday, very early in the morning, we're talking about 6 o'clock in the morning, there's a phone call, unusual in itself. And when I picked up the phone, it was my head teacher or principal's wife. She was absolutely hysterical on the phone. And she had just discovered John Hughes, the head, lovely man, had died suddenly in his sleep. And so far from it being restful, I helped her organise the funeral. I had to let the staff, the parents, the local authority know, and I was then acting head. And so it was a very surreal holiday, really. And I started the term as acting head. In those days, an incumbent deputy wasn't allowed to apply for the headship. And anyway, I'd been a deputy for a year, of which I'd had 4 months off. And they advertised, they interviewed, but they didn't appoint. And then I was told that I could apply. I had no real thought that I would get the job, but I decided to put in an application, and I was really surprised after my interview in January 1984 when I was appointed to be the head. By that time, I was operating okay, but I wasn't right. And they couldn't find out what was going on. They couldn't identify why I wasn't recovering and thriving. And over the next 5 years, I had all sorts of tests and treatments. But each time I had a test or a treatment, I got worse, not better. And so by 1987, I had to start using a wheelchair around school. And that wheelchair took me from the office to the classroom. I could walk in the office, I could walk in the classroom, or I could walk in the hall, but I needed the help of the chair in between. Fast forward to 1996. I was in my garden. I was pricking out some plants. I leant across the table to pick up a seedling, and I sneezed at the same time as I stretched. And I felt something ping. And we're talking about probably 3 weeks before the end of the summer term. I was in a lot of pain. It was not unusual for me to be in pain, particularly sciatica. And anybody who's had sciatica knows how challenging that can be. But I literally limped along till the end of term. And on the last day, I was doing the last assembly, and I had a high stool in assembly, which I used anyway because I couldn't stand for more than a minute or two. Did assembly, said goodbye to everybody, got off my stool as the hall cleared, and I couldn't stand up. So I was taken to the GP, who said I'd slipped a disc. Went to bed. The next morning, I could not move. I phoned a friend who came. I was taken to hospital. And to cut a long story short, eventually they did a scan, and they discovered that a disc had exploded. And so I was taken to surgery. When I came to, and the first time I went to stand up, as I put my left foot to the floor, so I would faint. And when I spoke to the surgeon, his comment was, "My dear, the operation was a complete success. It's you who are the failure." But the reality was I could not put any weight through my left foot without fainting. And so it took several blocks before I could actually manage to put my foot through on the floor. And so it took 18 months for me to walk to the end of a very different garden, because I've moved since then, but very small garden. And for the rest of the time, I had to use a wheelchair. Now, I'd used a wheelchair to get around school, but I'd always been able to get into the classrooms. But by this time, I couldn't physically get into any of the classrooms. Either couldn't get them through the door, or I couldn't get the wheelchair around the classroom. And so, I was established as a head. And for me, what was important, and I'd made a decision when I applied for the headship, that however I was physically wasn't going to get in the way of creating the very best, happiest, most successful education experience that I could for not only the pupils, but for the teachers. And I'd worked in 2 schools where that was not the case, and I was determined that that would be the case. And so this didn't happen in a sequential line, but I had to find a way of empowering my staff to take radical responsibility for their performance and a shared responsibility for the whole staff. It was highly successful. And
radical responsibility is something that I know is your main cut and thrust of leadership. But I have to, sorry to interrupt you, I have to ask at this point, at what cost getting up, turning up, showing up? Because lesser mortals would have just lay down to recover. You pushed yourself in an extraordinary way. That's really clear.
So if I may sort of continue in terms of the story, because 2 years almost to the day when I ruptured the first disc, it was the last day of a summer term, I was sick and I ruptured a second disc. I had surgery, again, failed back surgery. Remember, I'd learnt to walk again. This time I was completely and utterly wheelchair bound. I couldn't stand, so I had to use a transfer board. Now, I was in hospital for 7, 8 weeks. I got out of hospital it wasn't as long as that. I got out of hospital the Friday before bank holiday weekend in August. I was back at school part-time on the Wednesday of the week of bank holiday Monday. And you asked me what was it that enabled me to carry on? I had a really stark choice. If nobody had left out a cup or filled the kettle, I could not make a cup of tea. I could do daytime television, or I could read at home, or I could go into school, and it was organized so somebody would help me get into the taxi and get from the taxi into school. I already had an electric wheelchair at school. I had people there who could hand me whatever I needed if I couldn't get it myself. But I could do something I loved, that I felt was my purpose. My brain worked, my mouth has never stopped working, my hands, my ears worked, or I could be at home and be disabled. And so my choice was, if I can go and do something and be useful and not be a burden to the school, why wouldn't I? So when 5 or 6 months later, the consultant said to me, I think we might talk about you going back into school a couple of hours a week, I just laughed. I'd had 3 weeks part-time, and on the 4th week, I started back full-time. And that was 5 months before. And the thought of being at home focused on what I couldn't do rather than at school where I was able to focus on what I could.
Sorry to interrupt you. I'm keep getting a.
The thought of
I'm saying, oops, still, I don't think anybody is. Hold the line,
okay.
caller. So, Dan, my podcast editor, you'll know what to do. We might need to stop and start again, I think. Oh, you're still there. You seem to have frozen.
Me, I'm still here.
Isn't it? Have you heard me all the way through this?
Yes.
I'm so sorry. It's completely glitched at this end, and your face is
Okay.
sort of.
I'm going to cut the stream.
We're going to cut the stream and start again. I'm so sorry, Gina.
That's
We just have
fine.
to roll with what's going on.
I'm just letting. I've got the stream open on the window, and it does seem like we're still live.
Okay, so something's happening at this end from the restream point of view.
Yeah, we're still live. If you're okay to carry on.
Okay, so look, you've stopped juttering now, so that looks like it's restored. So I'm so sorry to do that. And Dan, the podcast editor, will know what to do. But back to you mid-flow, if that's all right.
That's fine. So the thought that I could actually be useful, go and do something really that made a positive difference, for me has always been the thing that's kept me going. And so I ran my school for over 20 years, and for the most part, I ran my school from the wheelchair. The gift of that was creating a unique approach to the personal development and empowerment and leadership. And in terms of how it helped people at school, teachers, pupils, parents, those are the principles that I've used since I went into and started my own business in 2004 or 2005, really, that ultimately it's our choice how we turn up. It's our choice how we engage. And going back to our much earlier conversation, I'd like to think that I would have created a very similar approach to the development of people and potential. But I'm honest enough to know that if I hadn't had the disability and had to find a different way, I'd have probably done it very differently, been very much more traditional in the approach, much more interfering, if you like. But necessity is the mother of invention. And the interesting thing is how powerful an approach it is, whether you are a child, a pupil, a teacher, a client, a business leader, because it is about how do you turn up moment by moment. So one of the principles within the school is, doesn't matter what your job is, whether you're a cleaner or you're a secretary or the head or the deputy, you are the leading professional in your role. Are you turning up and being the leading professional? Are you being the best you could be? And so a big part of that was having a shared understanding of what does excellence look like in the context of each thing: relationship, lesson planning, lesson delivery. And though that principle has worked since I started with businesses. So 2004, given an ultimatum, either stop what you're doing, because I also did a whole range of external jobs to bring a budget into school, not all at the same time. Ofsted inspector, a trainer facilitator for the National College of School Leadership and the London Institute, workforce reform advisor. all of that to bring a budget into school for special needs and for technology. All of those things gave me the skill base that when I was faced with having to leave school because I was working a 16, 17-hour day. Remember, I talked to you about the strong suit of taking things to the extreme in order to switch the body off. I then thought I'd had a spinal stimulator, an internal spinal stimulator fitted in 2004. And at the end of October, I was no longer a head teacher. I had no idea who I was. And I thought, what am I going to do? And I thought, I've got all of this experience and expertise. I'll start my own business. So in early 2005, I wrote my first 2 books, How to Kickstart Your Career and How to Manage Your Staff More Effectively. And they became my calling card, mainly for corporates to start with. And so I started doing coaching, mentoring, training, and some consultation for big corporates. But in 2008-9, we had the last huge recession. And in 1 week, I lost every contract for the whole year. By this time, I was doing some visiting lecturing for Essex University Business School, and they would commission me out. I was often invited back. And so I contacted those companies and said, well, lots of the things you invite me back for, they can be avoided. How about I work with you on a much more consistent basis? And that became the model for my first business, which is Gina, Gardiner Associates. And within a year, I didn't ever have to advertise. It was always a word of mouth. But I'm going to use the next bit, if I may, as my third leaf.
Yes, absolutely.
So we've got to the recession. I'm working with people. The business is very successful, but I've got this real ache almost that I need to be doing more. I felt that the quality of leadership had deteriorated hugely in that recession and moving on. People were target driven. They were forgetting that people are their treasure. And I was seeing more and more incredibly stressed and unhappy leaders who weren't managing to lead their people and were finding it difficult. People who were being managed and led who were stressed and unhappy. And I felt I needed to get to more people. And so my third leaf is I set up Genuinely You to be an online presence to be able to reach more people. I didn't know what I didn't know. I had about 10 people who were connections on Facebook, maybe 20 on LinkedIn. I'd never created a video. I'm not very technical. And so my third leaf is the birth, if you like, and the development of Genuinely You.
Yeah.
And so now, for example, I've got 26,000+ people on LinkedIn. I've got a presence. I've got a radio show. I'm all over social media like a rash. I still don't like technology, if I'm really honest. But for me, that's opened so many opportunities, both in terms of my own personal growth, but also in terms of how these days with the internet, you can have a voice that can reach the many. And for me, helping people to step into their true power, that's not having dominion over other people, but ultimately recognizing that the best version of them today is the foundation for the best version of them tomorrow. That's something that I'm passionate about and very proud to be able to do. My fourth leaf. 2 years ago, on October the 8th, I went to do a keynote speech with another member of Collaboration Global, Walter Asman, and he runs the World Mental Health Forum, and he invited me to do the closing speech of a week-long activity around, if you want better mental health as an individual, then you need to lead your life in a very different way. If you are the leader of a company, are you creating psychological safety? How we lead ourselves determines the quality of our life and the life of others. We were at Westminster Chapel, fabulous building, but the stage is about 15 feet up. So once you're on there, there's no escape. And that's relevant because wonderful man that he is, he's not very good at keeping people to time. And so people who were on the program for 10 minutes were speaking for 45.
Ooh.
And so instead of it finishing at 8:30, at 10:30, we were still going. Fatima Whitbread, the javelin thrower, was also speaking, sharing her story. And so at the end of the whole thing, I'd got a taxi to take me back to Liverpool Street Station. And under other circumstances, I'd have probably had a quick chat with her and said goodbye. But because it was so late, I said, I'm going to Liverpool Street Station. Are you going in that direction? Do you want to come? She said, yeah, I'm going to Liverpool Street Station. I live in Ingatstone. Well, we're both on the same train line. So we started talking. She came on the show. And at the end of the show, we carried on talking. She said, well, I'm working with young people in care, not working directly. I want to change the care system for young people in care and people who've left care. Will you help me write a few letters? Yes, says I. Little did I know. So that's October. Early December, she says to me, I want to set up a charity. Will you help me set the charity up? I'd never set up a charity. I had no idea. Yes, says I. Well, it's taken over my life pretty well. We had a huge summit in April, inviting every different aspect of care and post-care. And we're now working to really change the care system. And so that would be my fourth leaf, because if ever there is something that needs doing, given the terrible statistics, which haven't changed since she was in care, she's care experienced in the 60s, then that's another thing that I am incredibly passionate about. Takes a lot of my time, but I think it's so important. So those are my four leaves.
And what I'm so struck with is the radical responsibility that you've applied throughout the journey of your four apples there. I mean, that was just extraordinary. Total commitment, nothing work shy. I'm intrigued to know, when we get later on into any advice you might give to a younger version of yourself, about whether the cost of, the physical cost of what you've applied yourself to with your radical responsibility was maybe in other people's frame of reference could be too high a cost to pay, maybe, because it just sounds incredibly costly to your own, health, because of.
Yeah, I just say that the bit that was radical responsibility is important, but it has to be rounded. It has to be across all aspects of your life. And for me, I was on a course, this is after I'd left headship, and doing, deep development work and looking at values. And somebody else pointed out to me, health isn't one of your values. And I think that was really very telling. And so I had made work which was great pain control. I'd made it into an art form. And so I'd been so effective at switching the body off that I had, things had no doubt got worse than they might have done if I had started to listen to my body and been much more balanced about my health. So it's a two-edged sword, and I recognized that I had one side of the sword had too much influence.
And what do you think of skiing now, looking back? Because of course it all roots in the skis were too long.
That's a good one, because I was actually sitting rather than skiing at the time, and so sitting is probably far more dangerous than skiing. No, if I could, I would ski because I just loved it.
Yes.
And I recognized that it was a whole set of situations, but I also believe there's no such thing as coincidence. And if that hadn't happened, the gift of my developing a unique approach to leadership, which has helped so many people, I don't think that would have happened. And so whilst it would have been nice to have had a raspberry flavored pill and learn all of these things, through that, I don't regret anything. There's no point. But I would learn to do things differently. And it's still a work in progress. I still, particularly with the charity stuff, we would, there's only the two of us. And there have been times when, because things have had to get done, I have had to push the body beyond what's sensible. And so I do recognize that this is not a done and dusted thing. This is probably going to be, something that I have to be very mindful for the whole of my life, is that my health is important and I need to give it the time and the space that it requires.
So we're now on to 3 things that inspire you. That was 4 very profound shapeages. So now 3 things that inspire you.
The natural world inspires me. There is nothing quite so special as a sunrise, or for me, more often than not, a sunset. When I look at how amazing nature is, that it knows that the leaves are turning, and we don't have to, if we get out of the way, nature knows what it's doing. And so for me, it's a constant source of inspiration. The second would be, I'm inspired by the people I've worked with, that they're being prepared to open up, to be vulnerable, to share, and to do the work. Because for me, I work with people who want to engage and want to grow. And watching their growth not only inspires me, but perhaps gives me the greatest satisfaction. Because when that aha moment comes in, when they've been resisting, and then suddenly that they have an insight that shifts things, that for me is it's just the jewel in the crown. So that would be number 2. How many have I got to? How many?
A third inspiration.
A third inspiration. Well, this is going to sound a bit trite, but I've got. I love animals. And my cat Leo, and now Leo's sadly departed, but I've got 2 7-month-old kittens. They inspire me. Their zest for life, their capacity to, when something goes wrong and they're frightened and you see the great big tail and they scoot under the chair, and then 2 minutes later they're back playing or back eating. And we've got a lot to learn, I think, about living in the moment and not carrying the portmanteau of baggage that we do about the past, and not worrying about the future, so that we spoil the now. Because as we were talking about this morning, the only thing you've got is the now. And the fact that they trust, and that they're affectionate, and that they play, that they have a joy in life. Not so great when they're knocking everything flying, and I find another 56 cuttings to my plants. But ultimately, I think if we can take the essence and the learning from them, that there's a lot to inspire you in that.
And that's a delicious segue into the 2 in the tree shaking now, which is your 2 squirrels, which are borrowed from the film Up, where the dog goes, "Oh, squirrels." What are your 2 monsters of distraction? It could be your cats now, you've said that. But what are the 2 monsters of distraction, 2 things that never fail to grab your attention, irrespective of anything else that might be going on for you?
One's positive, and the other, I think it's positive, but it's not comfortable, if that makes sense. One is injustice. That really captures my attention. People being unfair, unkind, systems that put people down. Whether we're talking about people who make assumptions about other people, and being in a wheelchair is an interesting one, because people pat you on the head and ask you impertinent questions because you're in a wheelchair, or use that voice. Would you like a sweetie? Gave my secretary lots of hours of enjoyment when we were out, and she was pushing the wheelchair before I had the electric one. So that definitely captures my attention. I think the cats could be the second one, because they certainly do grab my attention. But I think, again, when I see something beautiful, whether that's natural world, or somebody's gone to a great deal of trouble to create a beautiful meal, or something like that, where perhaps it's the effort, somebody has gone that extra mile, that captures my attention. And very often it's what I call, and I don't mean it in a derogatory way, the little people. So I'll give you 2 examples. I went into, I was going to a meeting and I went into the loo. This is a while ago. I went into the ladies' loo and it was carnage. There were papers everywhere. The mirrors were splashed. The sinks weren't clean. The floor was a state. And it was quite distasteful to go in there. And I went back at coffee time, and there was quite literally a tiny little Filipino lady who made me feel like the giant in Jack and the Beanstalk. And she had been working her magic, and it was sparkling. And I went up to her and I said, "Do you know, you've done a fabulous job, thank you." And I watched this lady grow because somebody had recognized her worth. And it's all too easy for us to walk past these things. And another example, it was last Christmas, and I was going to do my Christmas shopping, and I was driving this poor young man potty because either the color or the sizes weren't available on the racks. And I asked him, could he go and find them? And while he was going to find them, I'd find something else. And so this poor young man was helping me. And at the end, I said to him, "Do you think I could talk to your manager?" And I watched him go white. And the manager came up and said, "What's the problem?" And I said, "There isn't a problem. I just want you to know what an extraordinarily wonderful young man you have who's been helping me, that he's a keeper. And it's too easy for us to complain, but actually he's gone out of his way to be pleasant, professional, and I wanted you to know."
And
Now,
it's calling out lovely examples of radical responsibility at play at its best.
I think so. And I think if we all started to recognize how much quicker we are to moan than we are to praise,
Yes.
and turned it the other way around. Research shows that we tell 37 other people when things go wrong, 5 when they go right.
Wow.
Moreover, when we tell people, it's a bit like a fishing story. It gets bigger and bigger and bigger. You know, it was a 5-minute wait becomes a 45-minute wait by the time you get to 37. And then they spread the word. So for me, it's how do we turn up and recognize and thanking people is so important.
It reminds me of my favorite ever leadership quote that I've ever heard, which just crystallizes everything, which is leadership is how you show up or how you turn up every single day. And beautiful shapeages there. Now, the quirky or unusual fact about you we couldn't possibly know about you until you tell us.
Well, I love to sing. And in my earlier days, I used to sing several nights a week. And I think because life has got in the way, I sing when I go to weddings and concerts and things like that. And quite often, if I go to a concert, it's something I know, I'm very naughty and I do sing it. And I have had people say to me, "You should be up there joining them." There hasn't been time, but I do love to sing.
And that's a kind way, rather than saying, "Can we let them sing it?" Because that's the person we've come to pay to sing it.
Well, actually, at times I've been told we'd rather listen to you, so it works both ways.
So we have shaken your tree, hurrah. Now we're going to stay in the clearing, move away from the tree, and we're going to talk about alchemy and gold now. Yes. When you're at purpose and in flow, and you've been giving alchemy and gold by the bucket load, but what are you absolutely happiest doing in what you're here to reveal to the world?
Working with people. I mean, I love keynote speaking. I think probably I love it all, but for me, the opportunity to engage with a larger group of people in one go, and I think it's a bit of a throwback to doing assembly. There's something very special when everyone's listening and slightly leaning forward on their seat, and when you have an audience in your hand, and I'm sure you found that from your work. There is something very, very special about that. I love working with clients. I love doing training. I thoroughly enjoy doing the radio show. I am very well blessed. I've always worked with things that I love doing. But at that capacity, that privilege of speaking to a large group of people, that's something that's very special.
And it strikes me how polymathic you are, and no one can ever accuse you of being work shy. You've got up from the get-go and you've contributed, you've made a difference. It's fantastic. Now I'm going to award you with a cake, Gina Gardiner. So we talk about cake briefly. Do you like cake?
Oh, it's my favourite food.
I love that. And so, what's your cake of choice, please?
Oh, I've been thinking about this since you said, and it's a toss up between a Bakewell tart, which has a cherry on it, or
Yes.
carrot cake.
Let's give you both. Let's be
Oh,
greedy. You can have both.
thank you very
Now you
much.
get to put a cherry on the cake of your Bakewell tart or your carrot cake with stuff like, what's a favorite inspirational quote that's always given you sucker and pulled you towards your future?
Einstein's definition of madness, because we all do it, is to keep doing the same thing and expecting a different result. And we do it harder, longer, more frequently. And actually, it's like knocking your head against a brick wall.
Lovely quote. With the gift of hindsight, now this is, I'm particularly interested in this because of your path and trajectory to your journey to now. With the gift of hindsight, what notes, help, or advice might you proffer to a younger version of Gina Gardiner?
One is that your health is precious. And actually, the old adage from the airline, put your own oxygen mask on first before you put on your you help others, I think is
Yeah.
very true. So I think health would be one thing. And I think if you're listening to this, your health is precious. And if your health deteriorates, I got gifts out of mine, but I did take it too far, and I think ultimately that's something that I would like my younger person to know. It
I mean,
wasn't.
listening to you talk about your health, I was intrigued with how you pushed through a period of time when you could have just recovered by laying still. That's not a criticism, but just an observation of the incredible tenacity to make sure you showed up,
Yeah, my
even though
mum
you were
called it bloody
constantly.
mindedness, and I think there
Yeah,
is a certain amount of that. I'm not sure that lying in a darkened room would have been the answer. I think it would have been finding a balance.
yeah,
And one of the challenges that I had is that I not only did I have the ski accident, but I'd had a virus and I was diagnosed with chronic fatigue. Was that what you could get away with one day, you would be very difficult another day. And so part of the challenge has been trying to determine where that line is.
yes,
But I think the fact that yes, it was great pain control. But ultimately, what I've learned is that we have to sit with the pain, and very often there's lessons to learn around the pain, um, and it doesn't feel comfortable. But actually, if you do sit with it, it's much easier to manage than putting it away in a box, and then the box opens and you've got no choice.
yeah,
So that would be one thing. I didn't really start working on the relationship I had with me until I left headship, and I was 50, what was I, 51,
mhm,
and I was back to being a spotty, well, eczema-ridden, angst-ridden teenager, and it took a lot of work to realize that actually my profession is not who I am, it's what I do. But my self-worth was very much tied up with being a head teacher, and who was I when I was not a head teacher?
mm,
And so I think a really important piece of advice to my younger self and to anybody who's listening: your self-worth is not about what you do, your bank balance, the size of your car, the size of your house. It is about learning to love and appreciate who you are, wobbly bits and all, and recognize that the relationship that you have with you is reflected in the relationship you have with everybody else. And so do that deep dive work. It's not easy, get some help, but actually it pays such dividends.
lovely. I'm going to award you with a. What we're going to do now is talk about legacy. We're ramping up to Shakespeare to talk about how you'd most like to be remembered. But just before we get there, this is the pass the golden baton moment, please.
Mhm.
So as you've experienced this from within, who would you most like to pass the golden baton along to in order to keep the golden thread of the storytelling going?
Ooh, I think I think Fatima Whitbread. would be somebody who would have so much to offer, and in a sense, it works very well with the fact that you've already had an introduction in terms of her, but you haven't got to know her story and her passion, and it's a remarkable story. So I think Fatima.
That's a wonderful gift of a golden baton. Thank you. And now to the Shakespeare.
Mhm.
When all is said and done, in fact, just before we get there, we're going to do a very exciting bit called Show Us Your QR Code, please, which is where if we want to find out all about where we can find Gina Gardiner on the internet, this is the link to Genuinely You. So would you talk about that and then where else we can go to find out all about you and your wonderful polymathic work in order to help others
Thank
in the
you.
world of the World Wide Web?
So you can go to genuinely-u.com, and you'll find lots there. Also to ginagardinerassociates.co.uk. I have a YouTube channel which I'm trying to build up. Please go and subscribe. That's Genuinely You with Gina Gardiner on YouTube. I'm on LinkedIn, Gina Gardiner. You can find me there. I'm on Facebook and I'm on Instagram. I've avoided some of the other social media platforms so far. Or you can email me at gina@genuinely-u.com. And if you'd like a free copy of my leadership blueprint, then just email me, gina@genuinely-u.com, put blueprint in the subject line and I'll send you a free copy. Or listen to Gina Gardiner and Friends on the Brushwood Media Network free app. It's around worldwide. For some reason, we're pretty big in Iceland. I have no idea why, but we're all around the globe. Come and listen to the show. Come and listen to Chris because he's going to be there very soon.
Wonderful. And just talk about your audience of Brushwood Media. What's the reach of Brushwood Media and your show?
So 3.2 million listeners a month. Late 60% are in the US because it's syndicated around the US, and that's where the show started. A growing number in the UK, 20 something percent. The rest are spread around the world. And for some reason, as I say, we're pretty big in Iceland, which I find quite amusing.
Fantastic.
But if you go onto your app store, it works for Android and Apple. It's Brushwood, all one word, Media Network. It's absolutely free. The show goes out at 8 a.m. UK and is repeated at 11 p.m. Monday to Friday. And it's got a really good times in terms of the rest of the world because of the repeats. And I have another show which is called Gina Gardiner Showcases Tomorrow's Talent. So if you're a musician, you've got to be good, and you'd like 4 of your tracks played, and an opportunity to have a formal interview about your musical journey, then complete the form, Gina Gardiner, tomorrowstalent.com.
Wonderful. And reciprocally, this show goes onto UK Health Radio, which is the world's #1 talk health radio. You've given us some profound insights into your own health journey and your own relationship with health, which I know will be very, very interesting to our listeners. Also, thank you very much indeed for having me. You hosted me absolutely beautifully today on Gina Gardiner and Friends. I'm very, very much looking forward to speaking to your audience too.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Back to the Shakespeare now. How,
Yes.
when all is said and done, this is borrowed from all the world's stage and all the better women Billy players. We're going to talk about legacy now. When all is said and done, Gina Gardiner, how would you most like to be remembered?
I believe that we all leave a living legacy moment by moment in our words, our actions, or lack of them. But ultimately, I would like to be remembered for somebody who has made a positive difference to many. And that positive difference is helping them step into their genuine power, and they in turn to make a positive difference to the world in whichever way. Because like a stone being thrown into the pond, if that ripples out, and that profound and positive difference based on kindness, integrity, compassion, and the courage to do what's right rather than what's self-serving.
That legacy is in the bag. I will don't need to put money on that particular equation. If you've enjoyed listening to the show and you'd like a conversation about guesting too, then thegoodlisteningtoshow.com is my show website. You can also connect with me on LinkedIn as well. And then very, very excitingly, there's a new series thrust which has been part of the mainframe of the goodlistening2show.com all along, which is called legacylifereflections.com. It's a series strand within the show. It uses the same storytelling structure in order to record your story or the story of that very precious, special someone for posterity, lest we forget before it's too late, with no morbid intention. But have a look at legacylifereflections.com too. Back to you, Gina Gardiner. As this has been your moment in the sunshine in the Good Listening To show, Stories of Distinction and Genius, is there anything else you'd like to say?
I'd just like to say thank you to you and to the people who are listening. And just to say, make the most of every day. It's really, really precious. Do something kind. Do something for yourself. And thank you very much.
I've been Chris Grimes. This has been Gina Gardiner. This has been the Good Listening To show. And thanks to Joe, our gorgeous technician as well. Thank you very much indeed. And